Welcome to the Storytellers, the radio show and podcast that features those who choose to leave their mark on the world through the art of story. I'm your host, Grace Sammon. I look forward to our time together today. Now, let's meet our storyteller. Jo Sands grew up in rural Florida, and this is where she developed her passion for writing. She is an author, a freelance journalist, an entrepreneur, a public speaker, a podcaster, and she serves on several nonprofit boards. She's also the founder and president of her own nonprofit called Jo Sands Voice, Write, Don't Fight Project. And here she works with troubled youth and people who've been involved in domestic violence. So I'm so excited to welcome her to the Storyteller microphone today. She lives in Georgia now. And Jo Sands, welcome to the Storytellers.
Thank you.
I wanted to jump right in. I've listened to other interviews that you've done, and you've described yourself as a unicorn. Could you talk to me about that?
I'm one of those unique individuals. I've always seemed to have landed in non-traditional places and roles, and so throughout my career, yeah, I've just named myself the unicorn because usually people see me in places and they're like, "What are you doing here?" From being in the oil fields in West Texas to managing guys up in North Dakota, and then writing, um, podcasting amongst all of that. My business clients, had no idea about my creative side, and my creatives had no idea about my business side. So I am quite the unicorn. Yes, ma'am.
So you have many, many facets to you. And one of the things that I feel is a passion for you across the things that you do, however, is really using writing as a healing journey. What was the origin of that?
So after the pandemic, or let me just back up. During the pandemic, I think it was a time for everyone to just be still, and for me, it was a time for my brain to just be on pause and quiet mode. And I really started doing some deep reflection, which I think a lot of us did. And I one of the things that I found in common in my period of being still and being quiet was that there was a common denominator of all of my different life experiences, and that was I had either written some type of poem or short story or piece of what was going on during my life at the time. And so I thought, wow, and it was so therapeutic. You go back and you read through those experiences, and you're like, wow, during the time that you're writing these pieces, you don't know what's going to happen on the other side. You don't know what's across the bridge. And so as I sat and I was going through all of my notes and notebooks and journals, I was like, this is pretty incredible. This is pretty amazing. And look at me, I made it. I made it. I'm here. And so I thought, wow, how cool would it be to share this journey and the process itself and how it helped me to just kind of elevate myself and just to put myself in a different position on my journey. And that's where the book came about, the collection of poems. I was like, you know what? If not now, then when? And so I decided to go for it. Um, Published a book, my first one, and my little chapbook, and I'm just so excited about it.
So let's dive right in there. I love that you have a book, and I'm sure there's going to be many more because that creative brain of yours is just going to keep going. But tell us about your book. I love the title, Hold It Up.
Okay. So the title is called Emotionally Constipated, and my friends tease me a lot. It's a saying that I often use, and people just thought it was really funny because, like I said, as women, we're multitaskers by nature, and so a lot of times we don't have time to feel or think or just wear your heart on your sleeves, because there's so much life is still going on no matter what's going on in your life, whether you're sad or happy. The world is not going to stop on its axis just because you have trauma, or your heart is broken, and or your kids are driving you crazy. And so emotionally constipated is a term that I use quite a bit to describe myself and what I'm feeling. And so the purging really just came about systematically throughout, and I didn't even realize it was happening. And like I said, until I started reading through my journals and my notebooks of all these different pieces that I have written during different times in my life. And this is over a span of well, I'm telling my age now. So I found poems like since like that I wrote early on when I was like age 19. And if you could talk to your 19-year-old self, or read how you were, something from your 19-year-old self, it's absolutely amazing, because I'm looking and I'm like, wow, I was 19 and this is what I was thinking at 19. This is crazy. What was I thinking? Oh my goodness. So, now that I'm 48, it's like um the growth, just the growth and the journey, the woman I am now versus the wide-eyed 19-year-old, naive and thinking everything is blue skies and rainbows. It's pretty incredible.
Well, there are definitely gifts to the aging process, right? To be
Yes,
able
yes.
to talk to that younger self, and also to envision yourself as you move forward on your journey. Why poetry? That I find it fascinating. You and I have some common friends, Wilnona and Jade, and they're such impressive poets. And I think there was a period in my time where I wrote poetry. I'm sure it was horrible poetry, but it got to it it helped me deal with my teenage angst and my young adult angst in a way that I think prose doesn't. But why poetry for you? And why poetry in today's society, do you think?
Well, one, people's attention span is very short nowadays. We are of such a digital age that I call this the microwave age, and we want things short, quick, to the point. The one thing that I noticed about poetry, anytime I'm going through something and I just want to get it out of my head really quickly, I don't have time to construct an outline, and then go back and fill everything in and put it into chapters. It's almost like when you're painting, abstracting, you can just throw colors on a board or throw it on a canvas. That's how poetry is for me. I can just take what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking and just throw it on a piece of paper really quickly, and then it's just like boom, you see the results. And that's why. And I can go ahead and get the thoughts out relatively quickly. And the beauty of poetry is you don't have to have any type of specific framework. It's pretty much, like I the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And some poems are like that. You can just put them out there, and it doesn't have to be constructed in a certain way. Or yeah, of course, you want rhythmic timing depending on what you're writing. Sometimes there is no rhythm and there is no rhyme. It's just, this is how I'm feeling. Let me get it out. Let me put it out. It doesn't matter how dirty it is, or how clean, or if my I mean, of course, when you go back and put it in a book, you want to edit and make sure your spellings are correct and your abbreviations and all that good stuff. But when you're initially putting those feelings on paper, um, the raw emotion comes out when you can just go ahead and get it out while you're processing. And then you can go back and read. And for me, it just kind of guides me through the process of what I'm going through at the time.
Do you then do, say, a first draft and then rework it? Or what is that process like
You,
versus, when I write, I think it's a final draft, but it's never a final draft. We just keep rewriting. What is
usually,
that process?
usually my process is whatever is in my head, I go ahead and put it on paper. And then I'll go back, not necessarily in that moment. Usually I'll go back weeks later, sometimes months later. And then I'll go back and rework for any type of, rhythmic errors, or any type of spelling corrections or anything like that, and to see if what my thought is really coming across, if it's really coming across to the reader, which is mainly myself. But to do the book, of course, you want to go back. I had to go back through, rework a few pieces so that they made sense to the reader, but still have that raw emotion in there. Which I never realized how vulnerable you feel when you're writing, especially
Yes.
like your personal feelings. You feel so vulnerable. We're already, creatives are already sensitive about their work, but um, to write about emotions and experiences for me, because I am a very private person. And so when it comes to anything dealing with relationships, most people have no idea. They just, I'm just Joe. I am just Joe. And so to hear that, hey, your heart's been broken, you've been divorced, you've had, traumas, and you've made mistakes, and you've had relationship issues. When people read that, they're like, wow, you like, I would have never thought that. But what's crazy is we help others to see that, what, no matter what you go through, there is life on the other side, and you can get through it. So even though I'm crazy funny, I'm the girl next door best friend, girl, I know what you're going through.
Right. And I think you're so right. For me, writing is the most naked thing that I do. That it is so hard initially to use, for example, beta readers to just open up your writing like that. Do you use any sort of sounding boards before you go to a publication?
I had a few sounding boards with this book, and of course, they were very surprised. They were like, "Oh my goodness, is that you? Like, did you really go through that, or did that really happen to you?" Um, and there are some things like you're really, I'm really cognizant about making sure that whatever I write, I try not hurt or harm anyone else in the process. So, like you said, it is a very raw, naked process. It really is. So, my next one, of course, is fiction, but I will continue to do and put out more poetry. But it is like you said, it's so it's almost scary,
Oh,
when
it is.
you're
It
putting
definitely is.
your and I did. My nerves were shot with this process.
Excuse me. But yes, your next book, talking about scary though, is a romantic thriller, I think.
Yes, it's a romantic thriller. I keep changing the name of it, but Breed, it's really a I I was actually watching a television show, and we were going through a period of having all these shows come out, like 12 Years a Slave, Django, um, bringing back, the feelings and the history of the Deep South. And I thought, what if someone, because of love, entered into the bonds of slavery, or allowed themselves to be enslaved for love? And so there's this story that comes about, and of course there's a curse that comes about, which there's a thriller in that. And it's pretty exciting. I don't want to give too much, but I can't wait to finish it because it has a life of its own now. I never really thought about writing a historical piece, but it's begun, and it totally has a life of its own. And I remember talking to Bonet, and she said, when you write, it's kind of like giving birth. It just has to happen organically. Don't rush it. Let your characters continue to develop and take on a life of their own. When she came out with her first book, Whispers, I asked her about the process, and she was like, yes, it has to happen organically. Don't rush it. Don't rush to try to finish it this year. If you don't finish till next year, it's okay. And
Yeah, we're talking about Bonet Bartran, who
yes.
is a mutual friend of both of ours, and she's absolutely amazing. Whispers is a phenomenal book, and she's also a screenwriter and director, and such a powerhouse of a woman out in Hollywood. And I look forward to her creating more and more works. And I totally agree with her on the idea, and I tell this to other authors as well, that when you have a book inside of you, It is as if you were pregnant. You don't have a choice. That book, that's when you know that you're the writer. When that book has to come out.
Right.
There's no you are not complete until you have birthed that book. What happens on the other side of that birthing process is different, but I agree with you entirely and Bonet as well. You also do work with at-risk youth and other people who have been victims of domestic violence. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So the initiative of the Joe Sans Boys Right Don't Fight project, I was actually talking with the girls, the ladies, Jade and Winona, and they introduced me to a wonderful young lady, Monica Thornton, who is she works with she's one of the founders of Beautiful Beginnings. It's a nonprofit that works with victims of domestic violence. And one of the things that I thought was really fascinating when she talked about because when we think of domestic violence we just think about women a lot of times, but there are also men and then there are children who are affected by domestic violence. I also have been in talks with the Wren's Nest there in Atlanta. They have a scribes program that also is tailored around young people writing stories. But what I was really interested in was whether or not they had a writing initiative to help kind of get those feelings out on paper. And so they did not. And that's something that we're currently in the works with. And not only being able to put those stories on paper and those experiences that will help others to kind of transition and process, but because of the indie network that we're in, being able to, because I'm also an audiobook narrator, being able to take some of these stories and put them in audio form. Like you said, we know producers, just being able to put them in other formats other than just being buried in an anthology. So that is the initiative of the Joe Sans Voice Right on Fight.
Oh, oh, I think that writing saves so many of us, so I'm so glad you're involved in that uh, piece of your work. Let's switch just briefly to your voiceover work. I'm very excited about that because, particularly, we were talking about COVID just a moment ago, but the voice books, the audiobooks have exploded during COVID when people may not have had enough of an attention span or they were out walking. So, how did that happen for you, and what do you love and or what are you challenged in that work?
So before I moved back to Georgia, I was in Dallas about 5 years ago. My son had finished college, gone on to play basketball overseas, and you know how you have that empty nesting feeling, and I was like, I've always been told that I had a nice soothing voice. Let me try to go and see what I could do with it. I started taking classes at Voices Carry there in Dallas, and that was really wonderful experience. And then I ended up taking a long form narration workshop with CJ Crit, who is an amazing audiobook narrator. And the bug, it just hit me. Like, she was just phenomenal. She voiced a lot of the Judy Blooms, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, she's done so much. Um, it, so she just working with her, because she's my private coach as well, and she hooked me up and introduced me to a studio there in Atlanta, Lantern Audio. And so I've been very fortunate to have done, several projects with them as well as some on my own. And it's been an amazing experience. The technique behind it, it's work. It is serious work. I'm gonna tell you, it's work.
It
But it's so fun being able to take an author's words, and it's like painting on a canvas. You're taking their words and you're trying to utilize them to tell their story in the best way possible.
it is such hard work. When my novel, The Eves, came out, many people had said, "Oh, it should be an audiobook." And because I do the radio shows and I do voiceovers for others, they said, "Oh, you should just do your own." And I have to tell you, I couldn't get past the first page without stumbling over and over again and trying to decide on inflection. So I love that you shared that you actually went to school to do this. You took courses, you took workshops, and it's incredibly hard.
Yes, it is. And but for me, taking the classes and doing the workshops and just getting extra training, is mainly to honor the craft. I believe anytime you enter into a new arena, you have to honor not only the craft, but the people who have gone on before you, to take the time to learn about your mic, learn positioning, learn inflection. There are so many little techniques to the craft. We'll never know it all, but it was eye opening for me because there were certain comfort zones and comfort levels that I had to get out of, because you are voice acting, and being able to execute and do it in such a way that you bring the best performance possible. And it's funny you mentioned that, because one of the themes, the underlying themes that I hear, is if you write a book, you should not narrate your own book. You should get someone else to do
Right,
it. I've been asked constantly, are you going to narrate your book? Are you going to turn it into audio book? Someone else will read it. I will not read this book.
right.
I will not do it.
Yes,
It's just different, because in your ear, when you write it, there's a certain sound that you have. When someone else brings that story to life, it just has a whole new vibe and a whole new feel. And it's pretty cool too to see someone else's take and point of view.
absolutely. Joe Sands, I could not thank you more than just that you were with us today. Any
Mm.
closing comments you have for any of our watchers or listeners?
Oh man, keep growing, keep writing, keep learning, and I mean, it's such an amazing outlet, and I'm just so happy to be a part of your show. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. This has been a copyrighted episode of The Storytellers by Grace Sammon and Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. Thanks for being with us. That concludes this episode of The Storytellers. I'm so glad you could be part of the story today. I hope you share the stories, tell your own, and come back for another episode, because when our stories are told, everything changes. I'm Grace Sammon.